Marshal Tito leads 2 days of celebrations in Belgrade. The occasion is the 4th anniversary of the Yugoslav Republic. From a Pathé News cameraman come the first pictures out of Yugoslavia since that country stepped out from behind the Iron Curtain 18 months ago. Today, the army Tito led against Nazi occupation prepares to repel Soviet occupation. With the anniversary celebrations lasting until far into the night, the Yugoslavs find time to reflect on the fate history has mapped out for them. Once the keenest of Russia's satellites, Yugoslavia is now just an in-between, precariously balanced between East and West. Gone are the Stalin portraits from the streets. Where once the entire output of the great copper mines was directed to Russia, it now flows to the West for pounds and dollars. Helped by her rugged mountains and hoped for Western aid, Yugoslavia is confident that she can resist attack. While mindful that Tito is still a communist dictator, the West moves to help him. For if Tito can stand up to Stalin, the possibility of Moscow dominating the world becomes that much less likely.
Em 1944, o Exército Vermelho libertara Belgrado dos alemães e escorraçara os anticomunistas do general Mihailovich. Depois de entregar o poder numa bandeja a Tito, Stalin deve tê-lo considerado ingrato por não seguir a linha partidária e por querer ser senhor de si. Mas iria ele permitir que Tito levasse a sua avante? Em retrospectiva, foi uma das mais importantes declarações de independência da história do pós-guerra. Tito entrou em Belgrado com o Exército Vermelho, que o trouxe de Moscovo. Em setembro de 1944, confiou a Stalin a sua preocupação acerca da possível participação das forças aliadas na libertação da Jugoslávia. Tito temia que pudessem interferir nos seus planos políticos para o país. Recusara repetidamente ofertas de tropas britânicas e americanas para ajudar a acelerar a retirada alemã, não obstante isso poder salvar milhares de vidas jugoslavas.
Western allies were immensely popular among the population and the rank and file, but they were almost as unpopular, rather hated, by the higher echelons, because the higher echelons feared that if the Western allies succeeded in having any influence in Yugoslavia, they would prevent them from taking power.
They were very conspiratorial. They regarded us with a great deal of suspicion. They were, after all, hardline communists, hardline Stalinists, and they accepted our cooperation because we were militarily valuable to them as they were militarily valuable to us. It was a marriage of convenience, if you like.
Quando, em dezembro de 1943, Churchill decidiu apoiar os partisans de Tito e não os anticomunistas de Mihailovich, começaram a chegar armas e munições em grande quantidade. Em cada lançamento chegavam também conselheiros aliados. Churchill enviou até o seu único filho, Randolph, para o quartel-general de Tito, numa indicação do seu caloroso apoio da causa partisan. Os aviões que traziam os abastecimentos levavam depois os feridos, que em alguns casos passavam dias junto às pistas de aterragem camuflados contra um ataque alemão. Churchill esperava que as armas fossem usadas apenas para matar alemães, mas eram mais frequentemente usadas contra os apoiantes do maior rival de Tito, o general Mihailovich. A maioria dos feridos era resultante dos combates com os Chetniks, nome pelo qual eram conhecidos os anticomunistas. De facto, morreram mais jugoslavos em combates internos do que vítimas das balas dos alemães.
I must have sent out 5 or 6 loads of wounded partisans, those that had very severe wounds, mostly gangrene cases. And as I would light a cigarette and give it to them, I would ask them, were they suffering very much from the wound? And inevitably they would say, my wound is bad, but I wouldn't mind it if I was wounded by my enemy. But I was wounded by my brother. And that meaning that he was probably wounded by Chetniks.
Assim que Tito conseguiu o reconhecimento dos aliados em 1943, deixou praticamente de combater os alemães e concentrou-se na eliminação dos seus inimigos políticos na Jugoslávia. Compreendera acertadamente que nenhuma força de guerrilha podia derrotar os alemães e que a libertação do país dependia dos aliados. Não é essa, contudo, a visão generalizada da história da Jugoslávia no período da guerra. Até agora tem subsistido o mito de que Tito chefiou os partisãs com constância e coragem contra os alemães e que, ao contrário do resto da Europa, a Jugoslávia se libertou a si própria. Mas os documentos alemães revelam que os ataques de Tito aos redutos germânicos eram apenas intermitentes e periféricos. A decisão dos altos comandos alemães de retirar o seu exército dos Balcãs foi ditada não pelos partisãs, mas pela crescente pressão dos aliados nas frentes oriental e ocidental. Na perspectiva dos aliados, os partisãs foram desanimadoramente indolentes na tarefa de sabotar a retirada alemã.
The Germans retired in good order, whereas the partisan forces concentrated on beating any non-partisan groups that they happened to come across. That was the first priority. The second priority was, once that was done, to rush as quickly as possible westwards to try and reach the western marches of Yugoslavia before the Western allies who had been coming up the Italian boot, and to reach places like Trieste and the whole of Istria before the British and the Americans arrived there.
Film just received from Trieste shows quite clearly the display of force made in that city by Marshal Tito's men. To all of us who confidently hoped that the United Nations would await the decisions of a round-table peace conference, the situation in Trieste was bewildering and alarming, to say the least. The Yugoslavs kept up a system of patrols who marched through the city fully armed. Even when off duty, Tito's soldiers and partisans kept their arms with them. By way of contrast, British servicemen strolled about without arms of any kind, and it may well be largely due to this forbearance that clashes were avoided during the height of the crisis.
A tentativa de Tito de capturar Trieste foi a última gota para Churchill. No início de 1945, no seu desencantamento, começara já a descrevê-lo como aquele comunista bem instruído. A 11 de março enviou a seguinte nota a Anthony Eden, ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros. O Tito que fica a estufar no molho balcânico, que é amargo, perdeu o meu apetite pela Jugoslávia. Eden, que nunca fora admirador de Tito, repostou a Churchill uma semana depois. Os Estados Unidos nunca viram com entusiasmo a nossa política pró-partizã. Foi sempre com grande relutância que os arrastámos atrás de nós. Teremos agora de explicar-lhes que, afinal, Tito não se revelou aquilo que esperávamos? A 11 de abril, Churchill solicitou ao Ministério dos Negócios Estrangeiros: dê-me uma lista dos oficiais e praças britânicos que estão presentemente à mercê daqueles selvagens. Referia-se, naturalmente, aos homens de Tito. Uma semana depois, dizia ao embaixador britânico em Washington: conhece a minha opinião sobre Tito. Deixei de confiar nele desde que se retirou de Vis. A 20 de maio, pedia o mais completo relatório sobre Tito. É verdade que foi educado durante 4 anos numa universidade comunista e que não se mexeu para lutar pela Jugoslávia quando foi atacado pela Alemanha, mas esperou que o Comintern desse instruções a todos os seus lacaios para ajudarem a Rússia? Nesse mesmo dia, escreveu a Eden: cautela, não permita que as nossas missões fiquem isoladas na Jugoslávia. Em breve quererão fazer reféns. Os homens de Tito alcançaram Trieste apenas horas antes dos aliados. Para a irritação de Churchill, o comandante em chefe local tinha relutância em avançar contra os partisãs, porque as suas tropas haviam sido instruídas para os considerar aliados corajosos e dignos. Mas após apenas algumas semanas, durante as quais os partisãs prenderam e até executaram centenas de habitantes da região, os soldados aliados estavam prontos para uma demonstração de força. Tito recuou quando percebeu que Stalin não interviria a seu favor. A recusa de Stalin em ajudá-lo deve ter causado um grande choque, sobretudo porque até aí Tito se comportara como o seguidor favorito de Stalin. Muitos historiadores argumentaram que a decisão de Churchill de apoiar Tito encorajou sem dúvida Stalin na sua ambição de procurar alargar o domínio comunista aos Balcãs e à Europa do Leste. Há quem defenda que a colocação de Tito no poder em Belgrado quase provocava um golpe comunista na Grécia. Se a Grécia se tivesse tornado comunista, a sobrevivência da Itália teria sido problemática. E se a Itália tivesse caído sob o domínio comunista, o ímpeto teria afetado o frágil equilíbrio da situação em França. Por outras palavras, a imposição do domínio comunista na Jugoslávia quase levava à propagação do comunismo a grande parte da Europa.
You may remember there's rather cynical bargaining of percentage influences. Stalin had said For Greece, 80% British, 20% Soviet. For Yugoslavia, 50% British, 50% Soviet. We weren't in a position to claim our 50% because we had nobody there. In Greece, we did. But in Greece, in the end, Stalin withdrew. I have a sort of feeling that if we'd got some troops into Yugoslavia, that we might have produced a coalition arrangement which would have spared the Yugoslav people 40 years or more of a communist dictatorship.
Para além de Trieste, Tito tinha também pretensões à Caríntia, a província meridional da Áustria, que fazia fronteira com a Jugoslávia. Para aqui havia convergido o que restava dos exércitos alemães, preferindo render-se aos aliados do que aos russos, na convicção de que teriam um melhor tratamento. Para a Caríntia haviam fugido também os Chetniks de Mihailovich, pelo menos aqueles que tinham escapado às garras do Exército Vermelho e aos partisãs durante a viagem. Mas, ao contrário do que acontecera em Trieste, os aliados não fizeram qualquer demonstração de força. Em vez disso, Tito foi comprado com a promessa de algumas forças aliadas lhe entregarem Chetniks leais a Mihailovich.
Very great mistakes were made in the sense of repatriating by force the Yugoslav forces that had taken refuge in Austria. The Chetnik forces were, on the whole, patriotic Yugoslavs who were simply anti-communist. But in the heat of war, these things do happen.
Quando foram conduzidos pela estrada para a estação de comboios, os infelizes Chetniks julgavam que iam ser enviados para uma nova vida em Itália. De facto, foi o que os guardas britânicos lhes afirmaram. Só quando viram os guardas trancar as portas dos vagões, alguns começaram a duvidar. Logo à saída da estação havia uma bifurcação, uma linha para a Itália, outra para a Jugoslávia. As agulhas foram mudadas e a sua sorte estava traçada. O comboio entrou num túnel no final do qual ficava a Jugoslávia. Testemunhas recordam o barulho ensurdecedor no interior dos vagões quando os Chetniks e as suas famílias se aperceberam do que os esperava. Não é um episódio que tenha lugar nos anais de justiça e fair play britânicos. O comboio internou-se cada vez mais na Jugoslávia, até alcançar a remota floresta montanhosa de Kočeva, onde os seus carrascos partisãs os aguardavam. Foram obrigados a despir-se e, de mãos atadas com arame, empurraram-nos por este caminho. Cada vez mais internados na floresta, ouviam os terríveis gritos dos que antes deles haviam percorrido aquele desafortunado caminho até que treparam ao alto de um pequeno monte. Para lá desse ponto havia uma fossa profunda, para onde foram obrigados a descer e para onde foi lançada dinamite. Esta rotina foi repetida pelo menos uma vintena de vezes, até que tivessem sido eliminados todos os cerca de 20.000 Chetniks que restavam. As sinistras fossas só recentemente foram descobertas. Milovan Djilas, que foi o mais próximo companheiro de Tito até este cortar relações com ele, admite nas suas memórias que imperava uma atmosfera de vingança. Os partisans, diz ele, mataram demasiada gente. Tito acabaria por pôr termo à matança por, segundo dizer, já ninguém temer a morte. Estimativas recentes do total de mortos na época apontam para os 300.000.
It's hard to describe how bad the terror in Yugoslavia was in 1945, 1946. People were being arrested, people were being killed.
It has been described as the Red Spring or the Bloody Spring. Probably a better description of it would be the Bloody 2 years.
Some people were shot for no obvious reason. They were, of course, accused of collaboration, but they were simply people whom the communists didn't like. The purpose for this liquidations, to use this word that was used then again, was in order to instill fear in anybody who had any thought of resisting the communist domination.
They had so-called list with black spots, about 8,000 of them, which were people who were marked for elimination, people who were marked to be punished for not offering sufficient support to the partisans during the war.
In the end, it no longer mattered what you did during the war. I thought for a while that my being with the resistance, that even being in Tito's army would protect me, but on the contrary, that was sometimes considered as an aggravating circumstance because you were alleged to have betrayed.
To me je igralo ulogu ideološki moment kod komunista da definitivno se obračunaju sa neprijateljem radi učvršćenja svoje vlasti. To je ona druga, rekao bih, loša strana ili preterane mere koje su inspirisale komuniste za tako, kako ste vi rekli, krvavi obračun.
I once calculated on the basis of figures which we had in Slovenia that there must have been about 200,000 people in prison at the same time.
Tito was absolutely sure that he has to crush down the Serbian national movement in order for his revolution to be successful. That's why the terror over the Chetniks at the end of the war and first years after the war was so tremendous. He had to behead the anti-communist Serbian resistance, which still existed armed in certain parts of Serbia. Some of them survived until 1949 and were still fighting the communists. Some of them were forced to leave the country and to escape in all kinds of ways. Some of them were imprisoned for 20, 25, 18, 15 years. It depends. But the movement had to be crushed. And moreover, it had to be showed as a traitor movement. It had to be blamed. It had to be, Tito had to develop a blasphemy over Chetnik movement. It wasn't a winner of the war who defeats his enemy. It was a blasphemy, making them anti-angels, making them devils of the Serbian people.
Mihailović, o principal demónio para Tito, foi finalmente capturado em março de 1946, após uma busca nacional envolvendo praticamente todo o exército jugoslavo. Foi levado a tribunal 4 meses depois, com toda a panóplia que Tito podia reunir. Foi criada uma sala de tribunal especial, para a qual foram convidados jornalistas de todo o mundo, e não se olhou a despesas para os transportar até lá. Para fazer pesar ainda mais o tom de culpa, Mihailović foi julgado ao lado de óbvios colaboradores dos alemães. Não foi bom augúrio quando o seu acusador Milos Minic, que viria a ser ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros de Tito, declarou que o objetivo do processo judicial não era resolver disputas, mas sim liquidar o inimigo de classe.
Optuženi Mihailović Dragoljub Draža.
Churchill, claramente embaraçado, tentara persuadir Attlee, que o substituíra na chefia do governo, a intervir, mas Attlee recusou.
We had statements from roughly, let's say, 200, saying that we are willing to fly to Yugoslavia at our own expense to appear at his trial. Because of the charges against him of war collaboration, we believe our eyewitness testimony is relative to these charges, and any trial that does not have our testimony does not give him a fair trial. The State Department conveyed our message in a formal diplomatic note to the court in Belgrade. It came back saying, the guilt of Mihailović is already decided. There's no purpose in these Americans coming over to testify.
Vrhovni sud Federativne Narodne Republike Jugoslavije, vojno veće, osuđuje
Mihailovich met twice with Tito. He had him in his hands. He could have killed him easily, but he respected international law and rules. When Tito grabbed Mihailovich, he was hardly waiting after 3 weeks to kill him.
48 horas depois da leitura da sentença e sem qualquer sugestão de recurso, Mihailovich foi executado. Afirmou: queria muito, comecei muito, mas fui arrastado pelo turbilhão da história.
I think it was something that was bound to happen. It was part of the gale of the world, in his own words, that blew him away.
Tendo-se desembaraçado do demónio Chetnik, Tito procurou preencher o vazio enchendo o país de enormes monumentos aos feitos dos partisans. O facto de grande parte desses feitos serem míticos não incomodava nem os seus propagandistas, nem os seus admiradores no Ocidente. O historiador oficial das forças britânicas na Jugoslávia afirmou: se a história é a propaganda dos vencedores, é natural que a história de Tito e dos partisans tenha sido mais difundida que a do derrotado Mihailovich. No que diz respeito à Grã-Bretanha, isso é sem dúvida verdade.
He had the great advantage that several of the British liaison officers who came into contact with him not only fell for his charm and for his capacity to put across his vision, but were also very brilliant men. One thinks simply of Fitzroy Maclean. The portrait that they have painted of the partisan war is a profoundly romantic one. It's a very mythic portrait, and it's a very powerful one.
There was the nostalgia. I mean, this was a whole epoch what was going on with a group of people who almost turned it into an industry, then always repeating the same thing and being quite convinced of it for 50 years or so.
Some of these memoirs, partisan pictures, as Basil Davidson called them, came out just as perhaps people in the West might begin to be questioning of Tito. Remember, he came very close to fighting with the British in the immediate post-war period. And then, as these memoirs appeared, so also Tito became David versus Goliath. He became plucky little Yugoslavia fighting against the Stalinist monster. And so there was no incentive to produce an anti-Tito picture, because it was so obviously in the interest of the West that Tito remained in power. And that myth has survived, and as I say, been fostered by a very brilliant generation, which is only now approaching its end.
In Tito's rise to power, very often one is looking to the left-wing influence, to the moles, to the communists who were in various secret services in SOE here and there, and I'm sure that they played quite a role and that they cooked the books. But I always like to say that it's not so much the Reds under the bed who were influential as the blues in the bed.
Visto que o local de nascimento de Stalin era um santuário na União Soviética, Tito certificou-se que o seu também se tornasse local de peregrinação. Tudo a bem do culto da personalidade. Dos 15 filhos de seus pais, apenas 8 sobreviveram à infância e só 4 destes chegaram à idade adulta. Tito sempre foi uma pessoa a ter em conta.
Because Tito used so much terror in the first few years of his power, there was always a menace that he might return to such methods. And so that was a basic plug on any kind of political opposition. People were always in awe of him, and that was part of his charisma, his capacity to terrify people. And at the same time, of course, to create a public image of great affection.
Para Churchill, a execução de Mihailovich na sequência dos acontecimentos de Trieste fora o ponto de ruptura. Tanto o jornal belga Europe Amérique como o semanário político britânico Time and Tide citavam alegados comentários de Churchill num jantar em Bruxelas. Durante a guerra pensei que pudesse confiar em Tito, mas agora tenho plena consciência de que cometi um dos meus maiores erros. O seu secretário particular, Sir John Colville, afirmou a determinada altura: representa sem dúvida a perspectiva do Sr. Churchill e não creio que ele se importe que se saiba, mas duvido que o diga em público, exceto se provocado. Pelo menos não aceita argumentos que contrariem isso.
Churchill, had he stayed in power, I think things would have been very different indeed. But the Tito myth was kept alive when the socialist government came to power. They had no interest in changing things. In fact, they obviously preferred to have Tito in Yugoslavia rather than the royal family back. And then in 1948, just as the awfulness of the Tito regime and the horrible things that were going on there began to seep through to the West, there was the Tito-Stalin break.
A ruptura, quando se deu, foi evidentemente um choque profundo para Tito, uma vez que se excedera para satisfazer Stalin. Mas a briga entre os dois foi acolhida de braços abertos no Ocidente, onde muitos diriam que já o haviam previsto.
One of the first things that I noticed about Tito, and I'd had a lot of experience in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, was that he was not the ordinary sort of apparatchik, which I'd rather expected to find when I was sent there. On the contrary, he was a very independent-minded character with a considerable idea of his own importance, ready to discuss anything on its merits. And I thought sooner or later the Russians were going to have trouble with him.
There's no doubt that when he took the risk of breaking with Moscow, he had some confidence that the British would help him. And we did stand up to the Russians. Attlee took a hard line with Stalin and said that we couldn't tolerate a Russian operation against Yugoslavia.
The West, of course, welcomed anyone who was able and was ready to break the solid strength of the Soviet bloc at that time. And that was the card that Tito was playing. There was no ideological clash between him and Stalin. He was still a communist and he remained that until his death. But he saw a way to emancipate himself from the power of Stalin as a person and to show himself as a dictator of his own, who doesn't have anyone above him.
After the break with Stalin, or we have to use the correct words, after Stalin expelled Tito from the socialist camp. Tito was protected far too much by the West, to my mind. He could have been even persuaded, not to use the word forced, to be somewhat more pliable and to accept the Western values. That means to be more lenient to his democratic opponents and to allow at least some of the democratic forms to come to the fore. He wasn't.
The consequence of this quarrel was that the Western powers, in the course of the Cold War, judged it to be in their interest to support a communist Yugoslavia, not a Yugoslavia that had turned into something else, but a communist Yugoslavia, which was to be independent of the Soviet Union, and thereby they hoped to cause confusion among the communists in Eastern Europe, i.e. in the Soviet camp. That was the hope, that was the policy.
From Marshal Tito's Yugoslavia, where today flags of the West are flying, Warner Pathé News cameras record first films inside Yugoslavia. 6 years ago, Tito, then a Moscow-trained guerrilla leader, established his regime. Today, guerrillas no longer. The army he led against Nazi occupation prepares for defense against Soviet occupation. It was Tito's insistence that Yugoslavia be governed not from Moscow, but from his capital on the Danube River, Belgrade, that led to the break with Stalin, bringing vast changes to Yugoslavia. Its great transportation shortage remains, but the Stalin portraits are gone from public buildings. Today, Belgrade residents line up for hours to see American movies where so recently only Soviet propaganda films played. From its embassy in Belgrade, the State Department follows eagerly the progress of Tito's about-face toward the West.
Os diplomatas americanos em Belgrado não perderam tempo para fazer a corte a Tito. Os acolhedores jantares ao luar nos jardins da embaixada tornaram-se comuns. Tito, por seu turno, viu uma oportunidade de ouro para resolver os problemas da Jugoslávia com a ajuda do Ocidente, que se prontificou a aceitar. O planeamento marxista estava a trazer a ruína industrial ao país. Tito não fazia menção de retribuir, mas isso não demoveu os americanos. Nessa época, o lema era: o inimigo do meu inimigo tem de ser meu amigo.
His survival in the clash with Stalin was really because he used Stalin's own methods against the supporters of Stalin within Yugoslavia, and was as ruthless as ever Stalin would have been at home. And in the West, this was seen as a sort of David versus Goliath. But within Yugoslavia, Tito was the Goliath.
Yugoslavia had its own little gulag in those barren islands in the Adriatic, where so many communists were sent.
Enquanto Stalin ponderava se tinha agido bem ao dar uma lição ao seu antigo aluno, Tito fazia os seus jogos. Optou por uma visita de Estado a um país ocidental e a um inimigo que conhecia.
The training vessel Galeb brings Marshal Tito, communist president of Yugoslavia, on a short visit to London. The Galeb is unable to take the Marshal further upriver, so he makes the last stage of his journey in the Port of London Authority launch Nor. Although the Galeb was delayed by fog, the sun shines brightly on London as Marshal Tito gets his first glimpse of the city. Past the Tower of London, the Nor heads towards Westminster Pier. In the shadow of the Houses of Parliament, the launch approaches the pier. Spectators are kept well away from the landing stage as the Marshal steps ashore to be greeted by the Duke of Edinburgh, Mr. Churchill, and the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Anthony Eden, who has recently returned from the United States. Admiral Sir Roger McGrigor is among the distinguished people who bid him welcome. Now the Marshal speaks a greeting to Britain.
I wish to assure from this place the people and leading men of Great Britain that they should consider the people of my country as their truest allies, because the people of New Yugoslavia are tending towards the same aim as the people of Great Britain.
The Duke of Edinburgh and the Prime Minister accompany the Marshal up the steps of the embankment, where a naval guard of honor is drawn up for his inspection. Strict security measures have been taken to guard Marshal Tito, and few spectators are allowed within the area of Westminster Pier. Thousands of Yugoslavs have been screened by Scotland Yard, and some who are known to have strongly opposed the President's visit are being kept under observation. This is the first time the Marshal has left his own country since he broke away from Communist Russia, and the Foreign Office Secret Service have warned MI5 that there is a very real risk of an attempt to harm him during his stay in Britain. The Duke wears the uniform of an Admiral of the Fleet for the first time for this occasion. The inspection over, the Marshal prepares to leave for a short private meeting with Mr. Churchill. As the Marshal steps into his bulletproof car, a magnesium flare explodes 40 yards from him. A cloud of blue-grey smoke rises, but no damage is done as the cavalcade, which includes a carload of Yugoslav detectives, makes its way to Downing Street. No spectator, except pressmen and newsreel cameramen, are allowed into Downing Street as the Marshal and Mr. Churchill arrive. Even the location of the country house where Marshal Tito will stay is not known, but inside number 10, the Yugoslavian president can relax in company with the Premier. No information is given as to the discussions planned between Marshal Tito and the British government, but it is believed that he has come with 3 demands: for more aid from the Western powers, for more arms, especially aircraft, and to negotiate for a meeting with Italy over Yugoslavia's claim to the port of Trieste. Later, the Marshal, again accompanied by his bodyguard, drives from Downing Street to the Cenotaph in Whitehall. Mr. Churchill makes the short journey on foot. At the cenotaph, a huge wreath bearing the words, "The President of Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia," is laid by the Marshal at the foot of the monument in honor of the dead of 2 world wars. The brief ceremony of homage draws to its close, and the Marshal bids farewell to our heads of state. The policies of our 2 countries may not run parallel, but it is to our mutual advantage to work more closely together, and Britain gives a warm welcome to the President of Yugoslavia.
He was very smart, very intelligent, you know. He knew how to handle the situation beautifully, and he really conned both of us and the Russians.
Foi quando Tito estava em Londres que estalou a notícia da morte de Stalin. Os novos governantes de Moscovo, Khrushchev e Bulganin, estavam ansiosos por fazer as pazes, tal como o próprio Tito. Convidou-os para a sua casa de verão para fazer alarde do seu novo estilo de vida. Tito gostava dos bens materiais. Na visão dele, o proletariado vencera a guerra de classes e, como seu legítimo representante, devia ser visto a desfrutar do aparato do poder e dos privilégios de reis e barões. Os líderes soviéticos pareceram impressionados e as suas discussões resultaram num acordo formal que punha termo aos anteriores mal-entendidos. Contudo, muitos políticos do Ocidente não perceberam a mensagem.
Tito always recognized that any threat to his hold on power from outside came from the East, not from the West. He realized that the Soviet Union, if it felt that Yugoslavia was going to fall out of communist control, which essentially meant out of his own hands, would intervene. And so he, both in 56 and in 68, at the time of the Hungarian Revolution and then the Prague Spring, made it clear to the Soviet leadership that he endorsed preserving Hungary and then Czechoslovakia within the Warsaw Pact. And of course, infamously, assisted in delivering Imre Nagy and other leaders of the Hungarian Revolution over to the KGB and to their fate.
Não decorreu muito tempo até Tito receber um convite dos soviéticos, ansiosos por cimentar a amizade redescoberta. Permitiram-lhe até visitar o escritório de Stalin. Tito deve ter-se deleitado ao entrar na sala onde a sua queda fora planeada. Estava agora na posição ideal para ser cortejado pelo Ocidente e pelo Leste, de poder jogar com o antagonismo das 2 superpotências em seu próprio benefício. Tito conseguiu talhar uma presença na cena internacional desproporcionada para um país pequeno e relativamente atrasado como a Jugoslávia.
Marshal Tito is a guest aboard the American aircraft carrier Coral Sea in the waters of Split, Yugoslavia, and watches a display of combat tactics by the carrier's planes. Tito, a communist who defies Russian orders, sees that America will strike hard if need be.
The island of Brioni in the Adriatic looks a delightfully peaceful and attractive spot. It was here, at the Yugoslav president's summer home, that the recent meeting with America's Secretary of State took place. Mr. Dulles and his wife were entertained by the President and Madam Tito, and our pictures give the social angle. Political talks were held as well, of course, and probable subjects were the future status of East European states, the Balkan alliance, and Middle East tension. President Tito visits Colonel Nasser in Cairo shortly.
At Cairo Central Station, Yugoslav President Marshal Tito is welcomed by Colonel Nasser, Egypt's Prime Minister. With the Near East at boiling point, this meeting between the 2 nations which stand on its flanks is no mere formal occasion. Colonel Nasser presents the Marshal with the Order of the Nile in the presidential palace. The 2 leaders declare themselves opposed to joining either of the 2 great military blocs. This is an important statement just now, when neutrality is becoming the dream of so many of the world's smaller nations. Marshal Tito, the communist president of Yugoslavia, arrives in New Delhi after a 680-mile journey from Bombay. The Marshal is here to meet several of India's leading ministers for talks which aim to bring about clearer understanding between the 2 countries. With Mr. Mr. Nehru, India's Prime Minister, Marshal Tito issues a statement following their talks, denying that they intend to form a third bloc between East and West.
Mas apesar do desmentido, Tito, Nehru e Nasser formaram o seu bloco do Terceiro Mundo, que viria a ser um espinho cravado no flanco do Ocidente, não apenas na questão do Suez, mas sobretudo nas Nações Unidas. A ONU tornava-se cada vez mais um organismo anti-Ocidente.
Tito was perhaps the first of these flamboyant heads of state who was much better known than his country, and indeed who summed up his country.
He couldn't be simply satisfied with being the charismatic ruler of a small country like Yugoslavia.
Não há dúvida de que a reputação internacional de Tito trouxe mais credibilidade aos países do Terceiro Mundo, que por sua vez lhe consideram um estatuto quase divino. O facto de alguns desses governantes serem tão corruptos e cruéis como ele não o dissuadiu, obviamente.
Most third world countries became very quickly authoritarian one-party dictatorships. And in that sense, Tito was a model. He showed how you could establish a state ruled by the leader. It didn't matter whether you were communist or not, but also one which could combine anti-Western rhetoric with getting Western aid. And this was one of his great achievements. He could appeal to a sense of Western guilt, a sense of Western responsibility, and to a degree also to Western realpolitik. Support Yugoslavia in order to keep the Soviet Union and the Red Army away from the Adriatic, away from Italy. Back in 1948, of course, that was a real fear on the part of the West that the Soviet Union would expand into Western Europe, and therefore any ally against that was a worthwhile ally. Later on, Tito, in a sense, simply appealed to the bureaucratic inertia that said, we've been giving aid, let's carry on.
Oh, Tito is the one who benefited most from the Cold War, because he was neither here nor there, so he was fated by both sides, he was courted by both sides.
Até Camelot lhe abriu as portas e aparentemente também Kennedy se deixou seduzir por Tito.
He was a trickster, he was a con man.
Tito was a great fraud, profoundly so. He was a very ebullient figure. He was a combination of a sort of Goering on the one hand and a Robert Maxwell on the other.
Não obstante o facto das mulheres serem importantes para ele ao nível sexual, Tito parecia mais feliz na companhia de homens. O seu passatempo predileto era a caça, e todos os anos os membros masculinos do corpo diplomático de Belgrado tinham de apresentar-se equipados a preceito. Desconhece-se ainda se políticas eram alteradas e mentes influenciadas em resultado desta reunião anual. Mas com o envelhecimento de Tito, os seus hábitos tornaram-se cada vez mais arraigados, e esta era uma das poucas oportunidades que os diplomatas tinham de encontrá-lo. Era também uma desculpa para se vestir a preceito, algo que obviamente lhe agradava. Era um homem de fardas, de um grande número de fardas, e com o passar do tempo foram se tornando mais elaboradas. O esplendor da roupa era muito importante para ele. Nas suas memórias, Churchill recorda o facto de Tito ter aparecido na sua primeira reunião com um elaborado uniforme feito por medida pelos soviéticos, enquanto o próprio Churchill vestia roupas simples. Churchill pode ter lamentado o facto de haver apoiado Tito durante anos, mas na sua velhice acabou por adulá-lo.
Tito was a brilliant rogue, a man who continued throughout his life to talk in a communist way, but I think increasingly saw it simply as a tool for his own power and his own ego. And in retrospect, I think the central achievement of Tito was to devise a constitution for Yugoslavia after his death, which was unworkable, and which in a sense would be the crowning achievement to show that only Tito could have preserved this peculiar patchwork of a country together.
He had an extraordinary lifestyle, a super regal lifestyle. But when the heirs actually tried to get something out of it, very little of it was his own personal property. Tito not only didn't have a dynasty, he hardly had a family. The name of Tito was his own. His wife, his sons did not have the right to the name Tito. They were just plain Broz. He was the only Tito. There was going to be no successor. There was going to be no Tito II. He was very much interested in building his place in history with a capital H.
Nobody knew him. Nobody in his closest entourage could ever be certain that they were forever in favour. And slowly over the years, people who'd been central to his coming to power, to his keeping it, lost his favour. He was a complete egomaniac. Tito was Tito. He, like most tyrants, and he was a tyrant, though not the greatest tyrant of the 20th century, identified his own fate with the fate of the country, and that enabled him, psychologically, to act in a way which was often very ruthless and very dishonest.
Tito apresentou sempre a sua chamada ruptura com Stalin, por ter acontecido no auge da Guerra Fria, como a primeira fenda na cortina de ferro. Muitos políticos de direita, sobretudo nos Estados Unidos, que antes haviam abominado o seu regime opressivo, procuraram mantê-lo no poder a todo o custo e esconder tudo o que pudesse desacreditá-lo, mesmo depois da sua morte. Só com a Glasnost é que a verdadeira história de Tito começou a passar lentamente para fora da Jugoslávia. Mas foi a liderança do Terceiro Mundo por parte de Tito que trouxe maiores benefícios à causa soviética. A sua concentração nas questões económicas permitiu à União Soviética da era pré-Gorbachev alimentar paixões anti-ocidentais nas capitais dos países não alinhados. No final, o Ocidente pouco obteve em troca dos milhões de dólares que derramou sobre a Jugoslávia nos anos do pós-guerra. Tito gostou manifestamente de os levar a todos à certa. Stalin e Churchill podem ter tentado manipular Tito, mas este não só lhes sobreviveu, como permaneceu até ao fim senhor de si.